Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me for this segment, we have Ed Amoroso, CEO of TAG Cyber. He is also Professor of Computer Science at New York University. We're going to discuss cybersecurity trends. Ed, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Nice to see you, Jill.
And Ted, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing industries today when it comes to cybersecurity?
Well, it's kind of an unfair fight, right? You've got enterprise security teams trying to stop, in many cases, nation states, and it's really become a big problem. You see ransomware attacks almost every week now, and these are not initiated by, hackers sitting in a bedroom somewhere. These are done by capable actors. So biggest issue right now is it's a very unfair fight.
Yeah, and so why is protecting data so crucial, particularly when you're looking at the financial services industry?
It's funny, Jill, if you go back far enough, businesses would describe their value in terms of like tangible assets, like the factory and their inventory and their buildings and stuff like that. But and I'm sure people watching know, the businesses now describe their assets in terms of data, virtual kind of infrastructure. That's a whole concept of digital transformation, taking tangible things to something that's automated, more virtual. So data is what lubricates that whole process. So if that gets hacked, then you have a very big problem.
And where does TAG Cyber fit into the cybersecurity ecosystem?
We do. We're research advisors. We do analysis, and we help companies basically make sure they have the right tools. As you'd imagine, playing defense is something that requires that you work very closely with the vendor community. So we need to learn who the best vendors are, what tools they're producing, what sort of the trends are, what they're good at, what they're not good at. And then we work with these enterprise teams to ensure that they have the right architecture, the right arrangement, and frankly, that they're not wasting money, because there's an awful lot of tools, as you'd imagine, that purport to do something very useful, but may not. So we partner with our customers to make sure that they're buying the right tools, spending the right money, and our research is based on firsthand interaction with just about every vendor. We count about 3,000 of them. Can you imagine? That's how many companies are doing cybersecurity commercially today. So it can be daunting to keep track of that.
Well, let's talk about trends and your outlook for a moment here. Is this a fight that's even winnable when it comes to cybersecurity, or is it kind of a game of, chicken or the egg, or playing catch up, for the rest of technology history?
I'll give you an example. I spent some time as an independent director for a Fortune 500 bank. I won't mention them here, but I was on their board and got to learn some things I hadn't known. My whole career was spent in telecom. Here's something I learned, Jill. Bank robberies still happen, like the kind that you see in a movie when somebody goes up and it demands cash, with a weapon. But it doesn't happen as often as it used to. And when it does happen, it doesn't cascade across the whole bank. It's usually a very isolated problem, to the point where I'll bet, Jill, you and I could go 2 months without thinking about bank robberies in our life. But it's hard to go 2 minutes without thinking about cybersecurity issues. It's just surrounding everything we do. Kind of the goal is not to make cybersecurity risks go away, but to become something somewhat akin to, say, bank robberies, where we know they happen, but we accept the level of risk. We know how to control it. We know how to live with it. And it doesn't become all out of whack in terms of sort of the size of risk to size of usefulness. Like you and I would get in a car and drive to the supermarket without thinking too much about the possibility that something absolutely terrible could happen. But it's not likely. And we've learned over time that that's a risk we can manage. Cybersecurity is to get to that point where when we do things online, it's not that there's no risk. Your building could blow up in 2 seconds, and yeah, it could happen, but it's not likely. That's the goal, to get to where the risk is low enough that we don't obsess on this and have to hold ourselves back from innovating, and so many things that happen when you worry about cyber risk, when it's all out of proportion. So I think that's the issue, not that it go away, but that the proportions become more acceptable.
That is such a great point that you bring up by saying it's an acceptable level of risk. It's part of, it's operational cost at the end of the day. So it's just technology and the way it's evolved, and when it comes to cybersecurity, it's just such a big part of who we are, and a great point that you had made, that it can't stifle innovation because you're worrying about that risk management, but it's also a big part of our economy as well. I mean, everything we do is integrated by some level of digitization.
Yeah. I mean, Jill, think about our elections, for example. The main reason we don't use an app and use our mobiles for elections, we're worried about cybersecurity. Now, think about that for a moment. I have my kids are all in their 20s. I know when they reach the point where they're sort of running society in another 10, 20 years, that we're going to be voting on our phones. There's no way that the generation represented by my kids are going to stand in line to physically vote through something. So eventually we make that transition. But the reason we don't do it is because we don't trust the systems and we don't have sufficient confidence in our cybersecurity. That's another kind of metric that we can use to determine when we have sort of arrived at our goal, when we can do things like elections in a very reasonable way. I think about the task of an election. If there is anybody here who's a programmer, they'll recognize the following. A programming statement is x equals x plus 1. That means you're adding 1 to a variable. An entire election is x equals x plus 1, just adding votes. The idea that we don't trust cybersecurity to do something that simple should give you pause, because we manage nuclear power plants, we manage energy, we manage transportation with cybersecurity controls that we don't trust to do a simple election. So there are some real issues that need to be worked out. There's some distance between where we are now and where we need to be.
Right. Well, I mean, one could also argue that we don't trust our existing system, as we saw in our elections this past cycle. I mean, why not put it on blockchain technology? To me, that seems a little bit more acceptable than physically going in person and handing paper in and doing ballots and working with the machines. I mean, you could argue with blockchain and that type of technology, it might be more efficient and safe.
Jill, isn't that the essence of digital transformation? I'm sure on your program here, you get people who talk about digital transformation all day. And what are they talking about? Taking complex, manual, tedious, unpleasant processes, think elections now, and using technology to make them better, to make them more convenient, make them faster, more instantaneous, better to track. And that would be elections using computing. So that's a perfect illustration of when you say, my gosh, why don't we do that? The answer is cybersecurity. It's because we don't trust ourselves to do it. So it's a really good way to think about and measure how comfortable we really are with cybersecurity, because elections are an example of something we all understand. And when society decides we don't trust it, you know we haven't arrived. When my kids in 5, 10, 15 years, they're going to say enough is enough, we're going to vote with a mobile app. I know that will happen. They're going to have to also contend with cybersecurity, and we're going to have to really reach the point then when everybody's comfortable that we can avoid cyber threats.
All right, Professor, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.